This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Thank you for listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, where we discuss all the news in the world of sports. My name is Ben.
And I'm Anthony.
We are back here on a Wednesday. We have a really, really good show planned for you today. Normally, right after the Super Bowl, you have kind of like that dead week, where you're kind of like reflecting on the season that was, all the sort of latest takeaways and reactions to the game. But we're really just transitioning away from that. But we are going to be sticking with a certain team that was in the Super Bowl, and that is the Atlanta Falcons, making a lot of wholesale changes already just 2 days after the Super Bowl. Well, I guess you can say today's the third day, but
right.
A lot of these storylines come from yesterday, so we'll be talking about it 3 days, but it's really 2 days. So anyways, a lot of big storylines coming out of the Atlanta Falcons and their coaching staff, so we're just going to jump off right from there. We know Kyle Shanahan is the new head coach for the San Francisco 49ers, and it totally makes sense. A position that we knew was really going to Kyle Shanahan the whole time. It really just a matter of time that they had to wait till the end of the season to announce him as their head coach, which they already have. So that means the Atlanta Falcons have a open offensive coordinator position. And, well, they don't have it anymore, because yesterday in shock news, I read this and I was just honestly really surprised. The new offensive coordinator in Atlanta is, I guess you can say, for one game, former offensive coordinator for the Alabama Crimson Tide, Steve Sarkisian.
Right, yeah.
Of course, Sarkisian was on Alabama's staff pretty much the whole year as an offensive analyst is the official title. I'm not sure what that really entails, but he took over for Lane Kiffin in the national title game against Clemson after Kiffin decided to bolt to Florida Atlantic a week earlier than originally planned. He was going to coach the national championship game and then go become the head coach of Florida Atlantic, but he left early, so Sarkisian was the offensive coordinator for one game and then goes in to Atlanta now. Sarkisian's 43. The only other job he has had in the NFL was a quarterback coach for the Oakland Raiders in 2004, so he's been away from the NFL for about 13 years now, and he's now stepping into, honestly, the best offensive football, the MVP Matt Ryan, stud in Julio Jones, two great running backs in Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman. So he's got a lot of toys to work with, but you'd have to imagine the team would have some sort of an effect without Kyle Shanahan, his schemes and his styles and everything he had really drawn up. But for me, when I read this is more about Alabama to me. Because think about all of the offensive coordinators that have gone away from Alabama now. You already know that Kiffin and Nick Saban did not get along.
Right.
They had Jim McElwain, who's now the head coach at Florida. And I get it. It's Alabama. It's basically literally just a stepping stone for the next point in your career. Kirby Smart was a defensive coordinator there. He goes to become the head coach of Georgia. Had a good year with them last year. Good recruiting class coming in his first full season as the head coach there down in Athens. So it makes a lot of sense. You go there. You basically use it as a stepping stone to get a head coaching job, an offensive coordinator job in the NFL, in the instance with Sarkisian here. But for me, I read this and I was like, did Sarkisian bolt because he couldn't get along with Saban already? Because no one seems to be able to get along with Nick Saban.
Right.
Lane Kiffin couldn't do it. Others couldn't do it. Is Sarkisian realizing, hey, like, I've only been here a few weeks, and I've kind of been laying back as my offensive analyst, and I'm already saying, hey, I'm not going to be able to get along with this guy. Am I going to just bolt now? And it's a great opportunity. It's a step forward. He's had some off-the-field issues with the whole DUIs and the drunk driving and everything. So he's had some issues, and I'm happy Sarkisian's sort of revitalizing his career. Now he's got a good shot here in Atlanta. But I think this is more about the relationship with Saban, and just no one can get along with him.
Yeah, so you've seen multiple people. Like with Kiffin, it seemed that was the actual thing, that Lane Kiffin couldn't get along with him anymore because you would see them on the sideline yelling back and forth at each other. So with that, you could absolutely see with Sarkisian, we're guessing at this point that that's the problem is because you would think, so you got offensive coordinator in both places, right? You got Alabama and Atlanta. And it's kind of the which one would you rather do kind of thing, right? Would you rather be the offensive coordinator, in college or the pros? But the problem is with the pros, you're not guaranteed to basically get back to where you were. Like they made it to the Super Bowl, and usually if you lose the Super Bowl, you don't make it back the next year. Sometimes you don't even make it back to the playoffs at all. So you're going to have the thing with Atlanta where now you're going to have all the pressure. I mean, I guess you're going to have pressure either way, but now you're going to have the pressure of following up Kyle Shanahan and everything that he did when he was there because he was the one that made that offense the best in the league, right? He made Julio Jones stay at whatever level Julio Jones was, and he helped Matt Ryan become the MVP of the league, right? Because last year he only had, I think it was 21 and 16 as far as touchdowns, interceptions, so he made him a lot better of a quarterback. And now if Matt Ryan comes out next year, let's say he goes 27 and 12 or something like that, or 27 and 15, something like that, all of a sudden it's like, okay, so you're much worse. Now all the pressure comes back on you to where if you were in college, I mean, odds are it's Alabama. They're probably going to win a lot of games. So it was like, which one would you rather do? Would you rather get yelled at by Nick Saban, but still have a lot of success and be able to build upon that? Because the problem with Lane Kiffin was he had so much baggage beforehand, right? He had so much from Oakland to Tennessee to USC. All these things kind of built up to where it didn't matter what he did. You were like, yeah, that's fine. You may be, doing okay now, but we know your track record. We know how this is going to end. Sarkisian doesn't have that. Like, he had the one bad thing at USC, which was a really bad thing, but he had one. Kiffin had like three of them, so he made the choice to basically go to the pros and get away from Nick Saban. And I guess you can call Nick Saban's coaching tree really good now because it's saying all the people that have left. But I also think it doesn't matter so much for Saban because it's not like Alabama's not going to do well next year, and it's not like he's going to get more people. Like, what's to say he's not going to take Chip Kelly and make him the offensive coordinator, right? Now all of a sudden Alabama's back to being a really good offense, right? Like, he may yell at him, but it's just, rinse repeat kind of thing for Alabama and Nick Saban at this point.
Nothing has been confirmed as far as where Alabama is going to go from here.
Right.
We're really just going to speculate. Chip Kelly makes perfect sense, although he might be wanting to just stay with the NFL, which, of course, he would want to stay in the NFL, but
right.
The option really is limited. I don't think anyone's going to give him another shot in the NFL. He goes back to college. It makes a ton of sense. He goes to Alabama. Really, it makes a lot of sense because of who they have at quarterback, Jalen Hurts. He will be going into his sophomore year. He's a runner by nature and really a quarterback after that. He's more of a runner than a thrower to me. So if he were to go into Alabama, Chip Kelly, he'd already have someone who fits his system completely in Jalen Hurts. So that's an option. I mean, there's Mark Helfrich, who was the former coach at Oregon, which is basically the same thing as Chip Kelly, just not as high profile. So
right.
There's a lot of ways Alabama could go. And don't get me wrong, this is Alabama. They've been the best team in college football for the last half of a decade, although they did not win against Clemson in January.
Right.
I mean, it's still an elite job, and going to be the OC there would be something really good. So someone probably high profile is going to be doing it. Just a matter of time to find out who it is. But sticking with Atlanta, they're making a lot of changes, not just who their offensive coordinator is, but really on the defensive side as well. So former defensive coordinator, he's not going to be there anymore. They're moving on without their defensive coordinator. He's not going to be retained anymore. So they have a new one who's in mind. It's the secondary coach, Marquand Manuel. So the Falcons confirmed that Richard Smith, who was their defensive coordinator, is not going to be there anymore, as well as defensive lineman coach Brian Cox. Dan Quinn took over the signal calling about halfway through the season away from Richard Smith. So Dan Quinn was already really involved in the scheming and play calling with the defense really from about halfway on. So for them getting rid of Richard Smith, I'm not going to say it's solely based on the fact that they kind of collapsed on Sunday, especially in the fourth quarter, giving up 19 points. So it's not simply because of that. Dan Quinn was already really involved in the defense already, and now they're thinking about bringing in Marquand Manuel. But they're making a whole lot of changes. I mean, it's not just them. Their offensive coordinator's gone. Their quarterback coach, LaFleur, he's expected to become the new Rams offensive coordinator, Matt LaFleur, that is. So they're they're making a lot of changes. New OC, new quarterback coach, new defensive lineman coach, probably a new secondary coach if Marquand Manuel becomes a D coordinator and a new D coordinator. So are the Falcons making a whole lot of good moves here? I mean, they're changing everything from a team that honestly should have won the Super Bowl.
Right. Well, that's the thing because so the offensive coordinator, you already knew that was going to leave. We already knew that beforehand, like you said. The defensive coordinator, I mean, yeah, it might be a bit of an overreaction just because of the game, and you had a 25-point lead, and all of a sudden that went away pretty quickly, considering it was about a quarter and a half. And, you know, the thing with Dan Quinn is he was a defensive coordinator, and a good one, right? He was on that Seattle defense when they at least made it to the Super Bowl, oddly enough also lost to the Patriots. But it's not like he doesn't know what he's doing, right? It's not like, let's say Kyle Shanahan was your head coach, and he decided to take over defensive play calling. Like, that's not his thing. This is Dan Quinn's thing, so I get the fact that he was saying, like, partway through the year, he basically said, like, all right, look, I'm going to take over for this spot. This is going to be my thing, because as a whole, for the Falcons the entire year, they weren't exactly his best. You know, points against, they were 27th in the league. So the defense was never exactly a strength for them. Yeah, it got better throughout the year, and you did have Vic Beasley, who was coming on, you know, leading the league in sacks, but it wasn't something that you could have any faith in, obviously, on Sunday. And the offensive thing makes sense. Offensive coordinator, I should say, makes sense. The defensive coordinator kind of makes sense. And the problem is when you do both of those, it looks like your thing's a bit of a chaos. But assuming that they get a defensive coordinator that you trust, then basically you were doing everything you thought they were doing. So it's kind of a two-headed thing with this because I don't think Atlanta's going to make it back to the Super Bowl anyway, just because it's really hard to do that, especially in the NFC when you have the Cowboys and the Packers and everybody else out there. So you can kind of have confirmation bias later on in the year anyways, because let's say they don't start off well. Let's say they go, you know, something around like 10-6. Just forget they only went 11-5 last year. It's not like they went like 14-2. If they go 10-6 next year or 9-7 and miss the playoffs, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, this team is much better than they were last year when it was just the offense that was really well, and you knew that coordinator was going to be leaving anyway. So it may look like it's kind of chaos, but I kind of understand what they're doing with everything.
They're just making a whole lot of changes, and I realize change is good. You mentioned the OC job was, of course, going to be up for grabs because Shanahan, whether it was going to be San Francisco or wherever, we knew about halfway through the year he was going to be a head coach next year. Right. That was fairly obvious. He's done an absolutely fantastic job wherever he's been as offensive coordinator. So we knew that was going to happen. But for me, I think they're just making a little too much change. Like I said, some change is good. But if you make too many changes, I think it kind of is a little bad. New schemes, new systems. You already have Matt Ryan who's going to have to learn a whole new scheme with Sarkisian, different styles, and that takes some time to get used to a little bit. So I think it's a little too much change for me. I would have tried to stick with a little more consistency. Mm-hmm. On the defensive side of the ball, I don't think it matters too much because you already had Quinn take over halfway through the season, so he's going to be doing the same thing next year as he already did for the last half of this year. So there's not much change going on there. But on the offensive side of the ball, I would have tried to retain as little bit more of these guys as they could. Of course, a new position opens up, a step up. You go from a quarterback coach to an OC, you're of course going to take that on. But I just hope that for the Atlanta's sake, they stick with what Kyle did and sort of mold Sarkisian into that same role and same sort of style to replicate the success they had this year. Because they were by far the best offense this season. All they can really do is go down from here. I mean, they're not going to put up all the points they did last year. You know what I mean? They're not going to replicate that again. They're going to take a step down. So
yeah, they had 540 points. That's one of the best in the history of the NFL.
Yeah, that was the 7th highest overall in the league's history. So they're not going to do that again. They're going to have to try and do things a little differently. So I just hope for their sake they can keep things going the way they did because they were absolutely fun to watch, and including even on Sunday, although they kind of collapsed, they were definitely really fun to watch. So let's take our first break on the show. After the break, we're going to talk about some basketball. Phil Jackson basically taking an absolute shot at Carmelo Anthony on Twitter. Talk about that and if he's really being fair to Melo after the break at the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back into the Golden State Media Concept Sports Podcast. Last night in college basketball, Alabama, not only did they play football, they played some basketball too. They defeated number 19 South Carolina on the road 90-86. You're thinking, well, that seems like a normal scoreline for a college basketball game. But the story of the game was it went to 4 overtimes. You'd probably be surprised. 4 overtimes, only 90-86. That's because these teams, quite honestly, did not shoot well. Alabama shot 42%, and then you have South Carolina at home shooting 26% and 16% from 3. The big performer for South Carolina, though, he had 44 points. He shot 9 of 25, and he made it 25 of 33 free throws. It's Sindarius Thornwell. He's a pretty good player. He averages 20 points, about 8 rebounds, and 3 assists. So 25 free throws, I mean, that's absolutely crazy. But they do lose at home 90-86 in 4 overtimes. Pretty crazy there. So we're talking about Phil Jackson now. So Phil Jackson, the president of the Knicks, and Carmelo Anthony, it's been really just kind of a roller coaster ride. I really want to explain it that way. I feel like in every sport, there's organizations that are simply, just a mess. In the NFL, I think the Browns right now and the Niners and the Bears, honestly, just a mess.
Right.
In the NBA, I'd put Sacramento in that case. Mm-hmm. I'd probably put the Bulls in there right now. But honestly, I think there's no bigger mess of an organization in all of sports than what the New York Knicks are right now. The Knicks have kind of been a laughingstock of the league for the last 15, 20 years, it seems like.
Give or take.
And now you have Phil Jackson as president for 3 years. It's like, okay, that seems like it'd be a pretty good idea. I mean, Phil's been a legendary coach, 11 rings.
Pat Riley went from coach to executive, worked out pretty well. Jerry West has kind of transitioned to these things. Like, yeah, okay, cool. He played in New York. You thought this was going to be a good thing. Yeah,
well, not so much the case. I'd say the one good move Phil has done was drafting Kristaps Porzingis. The kid's phenomenal. He's one of the best big men in the league already. He's going to be a star. He's going to be an all-star, I'd say, next year, the year after that. So I think he's done a great job there. But with the exception of that, not so much. And the last couple of weeks have been just really, really topsy-turvy with Carmelo Anthony. Reports are they're trying to trade him. Maybe looking at Kevin Love from Cleveland. They might want to move him to Boston, to L.A. with the Clippers. But the thing is, Carmelo Anthony has a no-trade clause. So you could agree to trade him to whomever you want, and he could literally say, no thanks. Like, he really has the final say on any trade, because when you gave him that monster deal a few years back, you gave him a no-trade clause, which he wanted. So you kind of gave Carmelo Anthony what he wanted. Now, the last couple of weeks have just been absolutely crazy. And you had a writer for Bleacher Report. His name is Kevin Ding. He wrote a column, which of course is his job, basically criticizing Carmelo Anthony for the problems the Knicks have and his play on the court. So Phil Jackson responds to Kevin Ding on Twitter. Something Phil Jackson literally never does is respond to anybody. He's the president of the Knicks, but I don't think I've heard him have a press conference in literally years.
Yeah.
We had Derrick Rose go AWOL and take a hiatus for a day, and he didn't even have a comment on it.
Nope.
So Phil Jackson does something totally out of the box and decides to make a comment about something. So he responds to Ding's column on Twitter, of all things. And this is what Phil tweeted. He goes, Bleacher's Ding almost rings the bell. But I learned you don't change the spot on a leopard with Michael Graham in my CBA days. And he spells days D-A-Z-E. Like he's kind of in a Zen meditation days as opposed to D-A-Y-S, which obviously he spelled it wrong, but we all get what he means. So he basically takes a complete shot at Carmelo Anthony. Because first off, he goes, Bleacher's Ding almost rings the bell. So he's basically agreeing with the column, criticizing Carmelo Anthony. And then he goes, but I learned you don't change the spot on a leopard with Michael Graham in my CBA days. The CBA was, what was it, the Continental Basketball Association?
Yeah.
So the Continental Basketball Association. So Phil Jackson was a coach in that league during the 80s. Won a couple of titles, and one of the players was Michael Graham. I don't honestly know much about Michael Graham, but I know that in a book Phil Jackson wrote, he criticized Michael Graham, and in his memoir, this is what he said. He said, quote, "Nothing I said made any difference to him. Whenever I tried to talk to him, his eyes would glaze over, and he'd retreat to some dark inner corner nobody could penetrate." So he's literally comparing Carmelo Anthony to Michael Graham, who he says, I could never talk to him. Whenever I tried to, he would retreat to an inner, darker place. His eyes would glaze over. Nothing I said made a difference to him. I basically could not get through to Graham. He's comparing Carmelo Anthony to Michael Graham. What is he doing?
I mean, they both have a national championship. I mean, there's, they got that connection. That's nice.
I don't think Phil really means it in that term.
No. Well, also Graham in the Continental Basketball Association, no shot against them, but he only averaged 7.8 points, 6.6 rebounds playing in there, and Carmelo Anthony's going to the Hall of Fame. Whether you love him or hate him, he's going to the Hall of Fame.
Agreed.
And it's one of those, I'm trying to think of an analogy with this thing, right? This is basically you just yelling at your girlfriend to get her to break up with you, right? This is basically just not wanting to, I guess I can't even say not wanting to get any blood on your hands, because at this point he has a lot of blood on his hands because he said all of these things. He's done all these bad executive moves, right? Bringing in Derrick Rose. I guess I understand that to a degree, but that hasn't worked out.
He's criticizing Rose and Noah for the struggles they've had this year.
Right.
He's blasting them too.
And speaking of Noah, fine. Noah, I understand when he was in Florida was a great player, and even when he was in Chicago for a while was a really good player, but he has been bad this year. I mean, forget about the fact that he shoots a ball and basically makes it a knuckleball whenever he shoots it. He's been a really bad player for them in general, and like you said, Kristaps is the only good thing about the Knicks over the last 3 or 4 years as long as he's been there, and we thought, like you said, he thought it was going to be good when he came there because he's Phil Jackson, right? 11 championships, one of the best coaches, if not the best coach of all time, great basketball mind, won some titles in New York, came back to New York, kind of, let's bring this all full circle kind of thing, and I thought it was going to be great, and it has been a disaster, and now he's just basically using his ego, right? The ego that's earned ego, but still, an ego, and he's trying to force Melo out, but Melo has that no trade clause to where he's just like, I'm not going, and I dare you to, do whatever you want to do. Try to make me feel bad. Try and say this. Try and say that. He's like, I'm not going to leave. And at this point, it's just two guys staring at each other, playing chicken and seeing which one's going to blink first.
To be honest, I don't know how Phil Jackson even has a job still.
Because he's paying him too much.
I don't know how James Dolan is allowing this to go on. Phil Jackson can technically opt out of his role as a president next year, which he's not going to do. No. He's not going to turn down $12 million a year.
Right.
If anything, he's got 2 years left on his current contract. If anything, he's going to make Dolan fire him.
Oh, yeah.
So he still gets $24 million.
Right.
As opposed to saying, I think I'll kind of leave because I've already created more of a disaster than this disaster of a team already had. Mm-hmm. Because that's exactly what he's done here. Every move he's made, with the exception of Porzingis, as we mentioned, has been a complete flop. He signed Carmelo Anthony to a 5-year, $124 million deal a few summers ago and gave him a no-trade clause. Mm-hmm. If he was not a fan of Carmelo Anthony, then why did he sign him? If it's a thing the ownership is saying, if it's Dolan saying you need to re-sign Carmelo, why didn't Phil just say, okay, I think I'll take my talent somewhere else because I literally have a resume that is second to none. I could become a president of a different organization tomorrow.
All right.
I don't really need this. He didn't do that. So you had to say that he at least had some want for Carmelo Anthony, and it wasn't just all James Dolan.
Right.
So you have to say he at least wanted him a little bit.
He probably saw a little bit of a Kobe or Michael in Carmelo, and he's like, oh, I can mold him like this, and I can do this, and I can do that.
Yeah, not so much the case. I've not been the biggest Carmelo Anthony fan. I honestly think he's one of those players that you just simply cannot build a team around, and that's really been Carmelo's career. He's made it to one conference final. Right. That's literally as far as he's gone in his NBA career. So I realize he's not that role, but if you didn't want him, then why did you sign him?
Right.
I honestly feel bad for Carmelo Anthony. He's trying to just do his job. He's trying to simply be the best player he can, and he has a president who's literally just bashing him and doing everything he can to get rid of him.
Right. Well,
and like Carmelo or not, like you said, he's a Hall of Famer, and he's liked by a lot of people in the league.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, whatever he said in the past, right, whatever motivational tactics he used in the 90s and the early 2000s and, even mid to late 2000s, he could do it because he was a coach, right? Like, if you're the coach, you can say all these things to the media to try to get the players to play better and, get motivated or whatever, because if they had a problem with you, they could come back and yell at you in practice, right? Like, you were there every day to basically own up to it and be like, hey, I said this and this is what I meant. He's a president. Like you said, we never hear about him. Like, Derrick Rose basically went MIA and he didn't say anything about it. Like, he drafted Porzingis and that was great, but then he went to Derrick Rose and never really had to account for it. Like, he's not ever there. So he could just say even these things. And I guarantee you he's not going to have a press conference about it. He's not going to have any kind of quotes about it. It's just going to kind of go away, and it's just going to be another thing we add to the pile of, oh, okay, he said this, this, and this. And he's made Melo a sort of sympathetic figure, right? Because Melo, for his career, has been known as like a selfish ball hog and everything else like that, which may or may not be true because some of the teams he's played on outside of the team in Denver, who would you really pass the ball to that you trust? But that's been Melo's, the knock on him. But Phil's basically been able to circumvent that, and now he's the guy that looks like he has all this ego and he can't get along with anybody, and somehow in the span of 3 years he went from Hall of Fame coach, greatest ever, to kind of a laughingstock, and it's kind of strange.
I think he's totally just fallen off the cliff. Like I said, I've not been the biggest fan of Melo. He's been a glue guy. The ball's technically glued to his hands until he decides he wants to shoot it.
Right.
But I honestly feel bad for him in this instance because he's just trying to play, trying to do everything he can. He hasn't really said much about the whole incident, and it's clear he's not wanted by Phil Jackson. So, I mean, where does this go from here? Like, where does this end? Like, does he... Because it seems like Phil almost is trying to force Carmelo into saying, trade me, as opposed to it being the other way around, as opposed to Melo saying, I'm going to stay here until you have a deal worked out, and I'm going to say yes or no, because I have the option to do that with the no-trade clause. It almost seems like Phil is trying to force Melo to be that guy that says, I'm not going to play a single minute for you until you trade me. And I don't think he's going to do that.
No, I mean, here's the thing. Like, and I'm not even like a petty person that much. Like, yeah, I can have moments where I can be petty, but if I was Melo at this point, considering all the stuff I've tried to do for New York, and I understand he hasn't done a lot of winning for New York, but it's not like for lack of trying. And to have Phil basically come in there and just set a flamethrower to everything, like, at this point, I would just look at him and be like, yeah, I'm not going to be traded. Like, I have this right to not get traded, and you want to be mean about this, so fine. I'll get everything set up. I'll say, like, yeah, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. And then why it's going to happen? No, not moving, just to mess with you. Like, I would totally sabotage everything about Phil at this point, because also you forget the fact that Phil also had the problems with LeBron and the whole posse situation. So he's emboldened, Carmelo is, by his buddy LeBron, who basically controls the league. And I would just make it so we try everything possible to get Phil Jackson fired, because this kind of seems like dirty pool all the way around. And I would just be super petty if I was Melo at this point, because I feel slighted for the past, basically this whole year. Exactly,
and especially really rough these last couple of weeks. So I really think that James Dolan and the rest of the ownership has to really step up here and decide they need to do something, because this doesn't get any better from where it is. It just simply gets worse. We'll take our last break of the show. After the break, we're going to stick with some basketball talk, but someone I have been highly critical of. He accomplished a really nice feat last night, but yet I am still going to criticize the kid for it. We'll talk about that and more right after the break at the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So we have a little bit of breaking news into the show. Packers cornerback Sam Shields has been informed by the team that he will be released. This comes a day after the Packers did release running back James Starks yesterday. Both guys really battled some injuries. Both of them, coincidentally, some concussions. Sam Shields missed the whole entire season with the exception of the opener against Jacksonville with a concussion. He's one of the highest paid defensive players on the team, and he really just can't stay healthy the last couple of years. So I'm not really surprised, although, I mean, I guess it kind of sucks, but this is the NFL. This is kind of a replacement league. The Packers getting rid of two guys that are kind of high on their payroll in Starks and Sam Shields now, and then I'm sure, I mean, I guess Ted Thompson has some sort of an idea, because usually free agency is not the case in Green Bay.
Right.
But I think this year more than ever, people have been highly critical of Green Bay. They got absolutely lit up in the NFC Championship game by Atlanta. They almost collapsed and lost the game against Dallas when they were up big. So maybe there might be a little free agency differences and maybe some changes going in there. And they did free up a lot of money with the release of Sam Shields and then Starks yesterday. So breaking news. I'm sure you and Jeremiah will talk more about it on the football show right after this. So we're just going to stick with some basketball now. So high school, what do you want to call him? Phenom?
I mean, yeah.
Product? I don't know. Product. I hate using this because I'm not the biggest fan of this kid. But
yes, you're not.
So we've talked about it on the show before. LaMelo Ball, I guess you can say the Ball brothers are kind of legendary in Southern California. They went to Chino Hills. You of course have Lonzo Ball, who's at UCLA right now. You have the senior, LiAngelo Ball, who's committed to UCLA. And then you have the youngest one who probably gets the most headlines, LaMelo Ball. We talked about on the show here before. He's a sophomore. He's already committed to UCLA as well. So last night, he scored 92 points in a high school basketball game. It was a 146-123 victory over Los Osos. Okay, I mean, the game has 32 minutes. It's 4 8-minute quarters. How you could have a 146-123 game is literally beyond me.
No defense.
I mean, literally none, okay, for both teams. I'll say that.
Yeah.
A 32-minute game, you have, I mean, my math is not the greatest, but you have 269 points in 32 minutes. Like, that is literally ridiculous. But anyways, LaMelo Ball scores 92 points last night for Chino Hills. He shot 37 of 61 from the field. And only 7 of those made field goals were three-pointers. So he shot 30 of 39 from two-point range. So if you're doing the math, he shot 62 three-pointers. So he was 7. Oh, I'm sorry, not 62. He shot 22.
Yep.
So he was 7 of 22 from 3, 30 of 39 from two-point range. So 92 points. He takes 61 shots, Anthony, in 32 minutes. He scores 92 points in 32 minutes. And here's where I'm going to standpoint, okay?
There we
go. And then I'll let you go because you're totally different on this regard than I am. So he said after the game, quote, his performance was dedicated to a classmate who's in the hospital, and that's great and everything. But I have a lot of problems with what his father said. His father is the coach. So his father, he said his teammates were aware of the situation and encouraged him to keep shooting as the points piled up. And he says, quote, his name is Lamar Ball. He says, quote, he went crazy. I unleashed him. And this comes after they suffered their first loss in their last 61 games over the weekend to Oak Hill Academy from Virginia. If you're at least a recognizable basketball fan and high school basketball fan, you know Oak Hill. Coincidentally, it's where Carmelo Anthony went to high school, Brandon Jennings. It's basically like college in high school. They recruit you from all across the nation to come to Virginia to simply go to high school here to play for them. It's a private school. They have the right to do that. So it's basically like college already in high school.
Right.
They have a lot of great players, NBA talents, as I mentioned. So to lose to them, I get it. They're one of the best teams in all of high school basketball, literally year in and year out. So I get it. But here's some more things that LeVar Ball said, who's the coach and the dad. He said, my boys get mad when they lose. LaMelo started on fire. He was attacking the rim. They tried to double and triple team him after he scored 45. He had 41 in the fourth quarter alone. But Los Ojos coach Dave Smith, he literally hit it right on the button for me. He said, quote, this is a joke. He talked to the LA Times. He said that the Chino Hills players fouled his team's players on purpose to prevent his team from running the clock and stop LaMelo from scoring. He said that's wrong. It goes against everything the CIF stands for. The Ball boys are very talented and great players, but it's embarrassing to high school athletes. I've been coaching for 35 years, and we've turned high school athletes into individualism. It's amazing to watch a kid score that many points, but it's tough to say it's what the CIF athletics is about. And for me, he hit it right on the button. I mean, this is embarrassing to allow one player to simply take 61 shots in a game, and you're fouling the other team to get him the ball. If you watch the highlights, the kid literally did not play a single second of defense. Every time Los Ojos had the ball, he stood at the half-court line, sometimes even on his own side of the floor, and just stood there and waited for the team to get the ball and throw it to him. That is literally embarrassing.
All right. A couple things. The fouling free throw things don't look great. I'll give you that. Also, if you don't like it, change the rules. But
how can you change that, though?
I mean, it's probably the same thing as like intentionally fouling people. You know, you can only do that so much in the NBA. But that part looks bad. I'll give you that. I'll give you that the intentionally fouling thing looks bad. Also, you said he's a sophomore.
Yes.
Right?
So he's
which makes him like 15.
16 years old.
I'm not yelling at a 15 or 16-year-old. I'm not. Like, I don't want to yell at college kids because they don't get paid. I'm not going to yell at a high school kid about scoring 92 points. Now,
well, I mean, it is his dad is the coach, so I'm sure there's. I don't want to speculate, but I'm sure there's a little bias there. But I mean, if I'm a neutral guy, I have a job to do too. You know, like
sure, I get that. He also scored 72 points in the game earlier this season. So, or LiAngelo, sorry, did.
And right now, I did not say it, but LaMelo Ball, he's a senior right now. You mentioned he scored 72 early in the game. He's committed to UCLA as well. He's a good player. He is sitting out games right now. They're resting him to get him ready for the playoffs.
Right.
So it's literally become a 1-on-5. And honestly, like I said, I don't want to speculate, but I could see LeVar Ball, who's the coach and is the dad, saying, LiAngelo, I'm going to sit you just so we can have LaMelo score 1,000,000 points because he's getting the most headlines right now with the whole half-court shots and pulling up from the beginning of the game because this is one of the best teams in all of America,
right,
let alone Southern California. How much do you really need to rest your players? If you're up by like 40 points, you can practically rest him the whole second half anyways.
Sure.
So why do you really need to rest a guy? He's going to miss the next couple of weeks. Couple of weeks of rest? Like, are you serious? I feel like this is just to give LaMelo more time to star and get on YouTube.
There's also the added situation of you said he was the coach and he's the father.
Yes.
That's going to create a conflict of interest, period. And you're going to want both your sons to do well. So how do you get both your sons to do well? Okay, so you rest one of them, let the other one go crazy. And then when the other comes back, you let the senior do well and kind of go back and forth, which doesn't help the other players on the team. I get that part of it. I always hate, I always hate when someone says, like, well, that's not what the CIF is about. Okay, it's basketball. Just stop. Like, that's stupid. Like, it's the whole respect the game thing. It's a game. Stop. Like, that part always, like, makes me, like I always hated that part of it. But this thing is, like, I understand you don't like the fact that he's scoring all these points and he's basically a ball hog. I get that. I just can't yell at a dude who's 15, 16 years old. Like, he's someone who the coach could tell him to shoot, and he's like, cool, awesome, let's keep shooting. And he keeps scoring, gets 92 points. And, yeah, that number's inflated, don't get me wrong. It's not like he scored 92 points in, call it, like, 60 minutes, right? It's
32 minutes.
Right, I get that. But at the same time, if I could yell at somebody, I would yell at the dad more than I would the player.
No, and that's where I'm really going at because he's a kid. I mean, he's 15, 16 years old. He's already been on YouTube everywhere with the pull-up half-court shots, and he already has an ego as high as Mount Everest.
Sure.
So
would you, by the way, if you did that?
What was that?
So would you if you would have shot from half court and scored 92 in a game and all this. You'd have the ego too. All of us would.
Exactly. Of course you would. So that's why I'm really criticizing the father more so than anything in this regard because it's almost like he's encouraging it. Like he said, quote, I unleashed him after we had our first loss in 61 games. Come on, don't give me that. You unleashed him? What, like you finally let the world see what he's really about? Like, stop it.
Well, how big of an ego would you have, honestly, if your oldest son is going to maybe be the number one overall pick in the NBA draft, your middle son scores 72 points in the game and is a senior and is basically going to go to UCLA also, and your third son could score 92 in a game and pull from half court? Like, you got to think that every single time you get a kid, he's going to be LeBron James. And
I don't think Del Curry has an ego. We have Steph, who's a top 3 player, and we have Seth Curry, who plays for the Dallas Mavericks, and then his daughter was also at Harvard. He doesn't have an ego like that.
Okay, he also wasn't the coach.
Yeah, but and of course he was a former NBA player, so he knows what it's like to go through the ranks and everything. But still, at least be humble with what you have. It's almost like, this is honestly just an embarrassment.
We just talked about in the last segment about a guy who had a big inflated ego in the NBA because he was a head coach and won all the titles. Like, ego kind of is a thing, and with these guys, I understand it's not even close to what Phil Jackson's ego is comparatively. But also, if you keep getting all of these successes piling on top of each other, eventually you're going to think no one can tell you anything.
If I was a parent of a kid on this team, I would pull my son out of this team, out of this school tomorrow.
The thing
is, you're literally not getting any chance to even play. It's literally, you get the ball, throw it to number 1, throw it to LaMelo. You need to foul, that way LaMelo can shoot some more.
The thing is, though,
I would pull him out tomorrow.
The thing is, though, you see this for one game, like in the 72 points from LiAngelo before that. What has this been going on every game? Because if this is just like a one-off, the fact that they lost and they're like, all right, no, we're going to score a bunch of points, we're going to get this back, through the media, like we're going to get this like loss back to us. That way you don't remember the loss. If this happens every game, that's fine. But also, like, I don't know and you don't know and we don't follow high school basketball that much. We just see the 92 points and go off of that. If LaMelo, LiAngelo, if they're scoring, basically call it 45, 50 points a game and they're always doing this, then that's fine. But this might just be an anomaly as far as like this is one of the games where he just decides to lose his mind.
I don't know. Of course, it is just one game where he decides to lose his mind and go crazy.
Right.
But, LiAngelo scored 72 in a game. The game before that, he literally scored 50. So, even scoring 50 in 32 minutes is kind of ridiculous. So, it's a matter of both of these kids. It's basically if they're on the floor together, they're playing 2-on-5. In this instance, it's 1-on-5. You can basically say that every single game. It's not like, okay, guys, like we're gonna let LaMelo take all these shots today, and then tomorrow it's gonna be Travis who takes 61 shots. Like that's not the case. You know what I mean? So it's literally just a matter of it's the balls against the other 5 players of the team. I would take my son out of this tomorrow, and honestly, I think it gets worse from here. Do you think that LeVar Ball says, okay, you scored 92, let's go for 100. That's next. That's only 8 more. That's doable. That's like a couple of more threes that you missed that just go in. You know what I mean? Like, that's next.
Yeah, but the other thing is, as much of a ego or whatever you want to call it that you think that LaMelo or LiAngelo was getting from this, they're going to go, LiAngelo's going to go next year and LaMelo's going to go in 3 years to, call it UCLA, call it wherever, he wants to go pretty much. But we've seen with someone like Alonzo Ball, right? Alonzo Ball is basically going to be either not the number 1 or number 2 pick, pretty high.
Definitely top 5. The kid's phenomenal.
Right. It all depends how you want to do it. In the draft, right? He's only averaging 15, 6, and 8 assists, right? So 8 assists and 15 points, like that's nowhere near a bunch of scoring. So my point is when he gets to the next level, it's going to balance out, right? Michael Jordan's the greatest player we've ever seen in the history of basketball. He didn't score that many points with North Carolina. Like college basketball, you don't tend to score a lot of points. You tend to have to share the ball around. So whatever LaMelo and LiAngelo or ego they're getting right now is going to get kind of shrunk once he gets to college, and especially if he makes it to the pros, it's not going to be the same thing there either.
But how much of an adjustment is that going to be? Because
it'll be a huge adjustment.
Because you're 4 years varsity starter, of course. You're one of the best players in the nation. You're playing like crazy. You have this ego. You're all over YouTube. You're literally unstoppable in high school. You're going to go to college, and you're going to get things literally shoved down your throat. You're going to attack the hole, and some guy who's 6'10" is going to block your shot when you're 6'2". So, you better get this out of your, system now, because in 2-3 years, do you think Steve Alford, who's the coach of UCLA, is going to take this? Like, of course not. You better get this out of your system now because it's not going to happen at the next level.
Are you sure he's not going to take it?
Of course not.
The reason why I say that is we've seen coaches. Hell, we've seen Coach K do this, basically sell their souls to get the best one-and-done players, right? And you getting the good player helps you get other good players. Like, you're like, oh, he went there, cool. Now I want to go there, right? And if all you have to do is eat it for a year, a coach will do that. Calipari has basically made a living off of the one-and-done mentality.
Yeah, but he has a history of saying, this is my team. if you don't like it, then you can get out of town. Like Calipari last night, for instance, they played LSU.
But you asked if he
won
would
92-85. He said after the game, like, tomorrow's going to be a rough practice for them. They did not play hard. These next 3 hours are going to be really rough. They're going to run like crazy, etc. So he's basically said, I'm the leader of this team. I am the captain of this ship.
Right.
If you don't like it, then you can jump off board.
But you just said, would you take...
Steve Alford's not going to let LaMelo Ball run the...
No, I didn't say he would let him. I didn't say he would let him run it, but you asked if he would take him. I think he would take him.
Of course he's going to take him, but I'm saying he's not going to take this. He's not going to take pulling up from half court and pointing at the ground and shooting it and taking 61 shots and having the other players foul so he can get the ball back and not running back on defense and standing at half court. He's not going to take that.
By the way, according to Max Preps, LaMelo averages 16.4 points a game.
Okay.
So that's
what
nowhere.
About LiAngelo?
So
he's got to be averaging at least like 30 points.
Fine, but you said LaMelo was the one that had the 92 points, and he's only averaging 16.4 points.
Okay, but still, I mean, just the whole mindset is what I have a problem with.
I may be wrong with that. That was last year. That was 15-16 season.
Okay, but anyways, as you try to find it, for me, I guess I've talked about it a million times, but for me, it's just a mindset. Like, I'm gonna tell my team to foul you on purpose so the clock stops so I can get the ball back to LaMelo so he can shoot another three-pointer? Like, that is just terrible. What kind of message does that send to your players? That's my problem with it.
I get that. I do understand that it looks like it's a bad look. I never said it wasn't a bad look. I just don't care as much about it, and I'm not going to yell at him because he's 15, 16 years old.
Yeah, it's not the kid. I mean, like, he has the ego. He's no doubt about it. He's completely talented. But for me, I think you point the blame at the coach, and in this instance, the father, because it's just really wrong to me. I don't agree with it at all.
Okay, so one more time. So Slam Online, I'm just trying to find what LaMelo's actually doing. It says here from Slam Online that he dropped 72 points last week, LaMelo points, averaging over 30 points per game to start the season.
So he's averaging 30. You got to imagine LiAngelo, who's a senior, is a little more experienced, probably better in this stage of his life. He's got to be averaging at least 30 as well. So, I mean, that's practically...
most of the points.
I mean, so they scored 146 last night.
Right.
And LaMelo had 92. So if you do the math, you have, like, give it like 50, 55 points for the whole rest of the team.
Right.
And I don't know exactly how much the team shot, but LaMelo took 61 shots. You have to imagine the rest of the team probably at the most 20, 25 shots.
Something like that.
So, I mean, it's just to me, it's just embarrassing to the game. And really, both teams, as a matter of fact, 146 to 123 in a 32-minute game.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at the local scores from high school games, I used to work a lot of them. You're looking at games in the 50s. The 60s are kind of like really big. 70s are like shootouts. This is practically an all-star game. These are prep schools in Southern California, which is rich with basketball tradition. Thinking about like Modern Day, they've been fantastic for years. I mean, 146 to 123, that by itself is embarrassing.
Right.
Like, just no defense whatsoever on both sides of the ball. All right, guys, so I kind of went on a little bit of a rant there. But anyways, that's going to end the show for today. I'd like to thank you guys for listening. Another great show as always. Anthony will be back in the studio tomorrow talking all things sports here at the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. We are signing off. My name is Ben.
And I'm Anthony.
Have a good day, and we'll see you guys next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.